Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Born to Heal podcast. I'm Dr. Katie Deming, your host, and today I want to answer the question, what would I do if I was diagnosed with cancer? And I'll tell you, it's actually easy. The first thing that I would do is a 30-day water fast. And I'm not alone, actually, in this idea or recommendation. You'll find clips of top health experts, including Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Nasha Winters, Professor Thomas Seyfried, Jason Fung, Dr. Paul Merrick, Dr. William Lee, all saying that they would use fasting in their toolbox against cancer. So I guess what I want to dive into is why. Why would me and so many other thought leaders in the health space recommend fasting for cancer? And really, I'm going to give 6 reasons here. And then in another episode, I will go into what does water fasting entail. But on this episode, I just want to help you understand why I would consider doing a prolonged water fast. So the first is cancer is a metabolic condition. And fasting is a metabolic approach to healing cancer. And this comes to the work of Otto Warburg that described that cancer uses fermentation or glycolysis to make its energy, or ATP, whereas normal cells use oxidative phosphorylation that requires mitochondria. And for fermentation, the type of metabolism that cancer cells use, glucose is the primary fuel source for fermentation. And when you do a prolonged fast, what happens is that you go into ketosis. And ketosis flips a switch from using glucose as the primary fuel source to using ketone bodies from your fat. So you're basically switching from primarily using glucose for the body's fuel source to using ketone bodies from the fat. And cancer cells can't use ketone bodies for their fuel. So you are essentially starving out the cancer cells. And this is what all the literature is about, using a ketogenic diet. You can create ketosis with fasting. You can also create it with a ketogenic diet. But so fasting also does the same thing. It gets you into ketosis. It can take up to 3, sometimes 4 days to get into ketosis. But once you're there, you're basically depriving the cancer of its fuel source. That's the first thing. Cancer is a metabolic condition, and fasting is a metabolic approach to healing cancer. So the second reason is that cancer is associated with increased toxicity, and toxicity of all kinds, from physical to emotional and mental toxins. And fasting promotes detoxification on all levels. So let's start by talking about physical toxins. So these can be toxins in our environment. They can be toxins in our food. They can be toxins in our products. And those toxins are stored in the fat on our body. And actually, you can even think, oh, I've been eating clean for the past, let's say, 5 years. Well, the rest of your life, all of those toxins are stored in your fat. And so fasting is a way that you can start dumping the toxins in your fat, because when you do a prolonged water fast, the body starts using the fat as its primary fuel source, which we just talked about with ketosis. And that is a way for us to start dumping the toxins that are stored in our fat, and allowing our body to detoxify itself naturally. This is our body's natural way of detoxifying itself. The other thing is emotional toxicity is associated with illness, including cancer. So there are studies showing that people who have history of emotional trauma have a higher incidence of cancer. And one of the beautiful things that happens for people is once you start detoxing the body physically, which typically the most heightened physical detox happens between days 4 and 7. Once you get past that physical detoxification, you start to see emotional toxicity coming to the surface for people. And they do have this beautiful purging of emotional toxicity during the fast as well. And then mental toxicity. So we know that our thoughts are related to what we are creating in our life, including our health. And a lot of the thoughts that we have living in modern society are toxic, and these can make us sick. And fasting, when I'm talking about fasting, my people not only fast from food, so they're just drinking water, but we also have them fast from media, getting off social media, and really fasting from their life. And by removing yourself from all of these, inputs that potentially are toxic for us, we start to get clear and have tremendous mental clarity about what needs to change in our life. And I've said this many times on this podcast that healing requires change. Fasting gives that mental clarity for what needs to change to facilitate healing in your life. So that's the second thing, is that cancer is associated with toxicity, and fasting promotes detoxification on all levels: physical, emotional, and mental. The third reason why I would do a prolonged water fast if I had cancer is that cancer acts like a parasite on the body, right? So cancer normally is feeding off the body. It's taking the body's resources. That's why people get thin, and that's why it starts taking over organs. It's starting to use the resources of the body for its own purposes, acting like a parasite. And fasting flips that script and allows the body to start feeding off the cancer rather than the cancer feeding off the body. And this is actually one of the most profound reasons why I love water fasting for cancer, is because once you get to 6 to 7 days of fasting, the body recognizes that no additional fuel is coming in, and it starts to prioritize using diseased tissue or foreign proteins as its fuel source, because the body is always trying to protect itself, and the body wants to preserve vital organs and also lean body mass. And so it starts looking for diseased tissue that it can use as the fuel. And in this way, the body is starting to feed off of the cancer and gives you this flip from the cancer, feeding off the body, to the body feeding off the cancer. But this requires prolonged fasting. You need to get at least to 6 to 7 days to start seeing this effect. And then what my mentor had told me when I first started doing this was at 9 days, you could see some shrinkage of tumor. But if you really wanted to eradicate all cancer from the body, a fast of 30 days and sometimes up to 40 days is a way to eradicate cancer from the body. So that's the third reason why I love fasting, is because it flips the switch on the cancer feeding off the body and starts to allow the body to feed off the cancer and heal itself. The fourth reason is that cancer is associated with a dysfunctional microbiome, and fasting resets the microbiome, creating an opportunity for us to refeed with foods that support a healthy microbiome. And if you think about this, this is really profound, because so many of us are working on healing our microbiomes because the modern lifestyle and the foods that we eat and the sugar that we have in processed foods, even if we've switched to a healthier diet, oftentimes we still have those microbes, and that can be a challenge to make sure that you're feeding the microbes that support health and, vitality, and eliminating those microbes that are problematic for us. But what fasting does, which is beautiful, is it allows us to reset the microbiome, and you have die-off of those problematic bacteria. And then when you refeed specifically with foods that support a healthy microbiome, then you basically are fueling the body to create this beautiful, healthy microbiome. And this is actually one of the reasons why I started fasting myself, is because many of the fasting centers, they refeed people with a lot of fruit juices and legumes like beans and starches like rice. And those are problematic for people with cancer in general, if you think about cancer as a metabolic condition that feeds off glucose. but then also for the microbiome, because when you are resetting the microbiome now, you're basically giving a lot of fructose and glucose that can feed the bad bacteria again. And so this is one of the things that's really beautiful. If you do this in the right way, you have the ability to reset the microbiome in a way that is going to support health. And then you can seal the gut. So you're basically really creating this foundation for health. And if you listen to many of the experts in health, they'll tell you that a healthy microbiome and a healthy gut that is not leaky is critical to creating health and vitality in the body. So that's the fourth reason is that fasting creates the opportunity to reset your microbiome and reestablish it with healthy bacteria. The fifth reason is that healing, in my mind and in the mind of many people in the space of natural healing, comes from higher levels of consciousness. And we see this in stories like Anita Moorjani's story, where she had a near-death experience, experienced higher levels of consciousness, and then came back and immediately healed her body because she knew that that was possible. And I've also had similar experience with my shared death experience of having access to higher levels of consciousness. And there are ways that people attempt to access higher levels of consciousness through, prolonged meditation. People do it with plant medicine. Of course, an NDE or near-death experience can facilitate that. But what's beautiful about water fasting is a natural way for you to tap into higher levels of consciousness, because once you detox the physical toxins out of your body, and then the emotional toxicity comes up and the mental stuff, you start to clear out and you become a real clear channel for higher levels of consciousness. And your antenna is tuned and more, I would say, better able to receive information from higher levels of consciousness. And we see that in the fast. People have what we would describe as mystical experiences without using any drugs and without having their heart stop or, anything like a near-death experience. We see that with fasting. And so, it's not an accident that Jesus went into the desert for 40 days, right? And Siddhartha Buddha, sat under the tree and fasted. So we have these examples in spirituality around fasting and as a tool for higher levels of consciousness. And so that's another reason why I love fasting, is because it allows us to tap into those higher levels. And then the sixth reason is that fasting is like fast. And the sixth reason is that fasting is nature's simplest and most elegant healing tool. That this is what animals do. When animals get sick, they stop eating and they go and they ground on the earth. And so this is the most natural, simplest way for your body to do what it wants to do, which is heal. Your body is designed to heal and is always wanting to bring you back to a state of balance and health. And fasting is one of the ways that you can do that. So, and, humans have done this through the ages, right? This is not something, we think about this as being so foreign in modern society because, they say feed a cold and all of these things that are actually just flat out wrong. Hippocrates even said this, that to eat when you're sick is to feed your illness. And we've just lost sight of that in modern society. But this is something that has been used over the ages and is safe. So there are centers that have done this with, tens of thousands of people and done it safely, fasting out to like 42 days. So this is something that is not new. This is something that is natural and really the simplest way to allow your body to heal itself. So, I think this is probably shocking to a lot of people because they think, I've lost my mind. 30 days of water fasting sounds insane. But, and I thought that too. The first time that I heard this, the first time my mentor brought it to me, I thought, wow, this is really scary. Like I didn't know what to think about it. I was like, really? Can people do that? And then as I started working with clients and having them fast, I realized that the body is designed to do this. The body does such a beautiful job, and it's so predictable, actually, what you see in terms of the detoxification, days 4 to 7, and getting into ketosis around 3 days. And then, people often will start to notice that their tumors, they have pain in their tumors after about a week, which suggests now the body is, going in there and using those cells for fuel. And I've had some remarkable results that I would never have thought was possible when I was practicing Western medicine. And the first person that I fasted, I have an episode with her on my podcast, Christy, where she fasted for 17 days and her brain tumor. So she had breast cancer that had spread to her brain, and she had radiosurgery, which radiosurgery should, it doesn't make the tumor go away, but it basically, at 3 months after radiosurgery, you notice the tumor looks a little bit bigger, but then it starts to shrink on scans. And then it just shows scar tissue, but it never goes away completely on the scans. And then oftentimes there's like kind of what we would call on the scan necrosis, but that's like dead tissue around the tumor from the radiation. So damage from the radiation. That's what you typically see. But on Christy's MRI 3 months after her water fast and having radiosurgery, the brain was pristine. The brain tumor was completely gone, and there was no scarring or necrosis or damage from the radiation, no dead tissue around where the tumor had been. And her neurosurgeon, I remember this, it's gone. And she thought, well, yeah, isn't it supposed to be gone? And he's like, no, it doesn't just disappear like that. And her scans have been, her MRI was clear. She just had her 1-year MRI a couple months ago, and that was still clean. And so that was my first experience realizing that something really incredible happens with water fasting. And then my second client, who did a 14-day water fast, her surgeon was recommending a mastectomy because she had breast cancer and it had come back in her breast. And she did a prolonged water fast. And then on her mammograms, the cancer wasn't there anymore, and she didn't end up having to have a mastectomy. So, that obviously got my attention, that there is something here. And then what I started to do is I started to send clients to some of these fasting centers, because there are people who do this. And I was thinking, well, my practice was so busy that it'd be nice to have my clients go fast somewhere else, and then, they'd come back to me. But there are a couple problems that I found with the fasting centers for people with cancer. And the main one is that with fasting, the biggest risk of prolonged water fasting, and this is actually important for everyone to know, you should not fast more than 4 days on your own, and refeeding, because the real risk associated with prolonged fasting starts at about 5 to 7 days. When you refeed, you can have pretty big shifts in electrolytes that can lead to very significant complications. And people have died from refeeding syndrome. So this is something that I want to really make clear on this episode. Prolonged water fasting is never something you would do on your own without some kind of guidance. And the big risk is associated with refeeding. So anyway, these facilities that I've sent my clients to, all of the big facilities that do prolonged water fasting are founded by doctors who follow a plant-based diet, low in salt, and also low in oils, fats. And this, in my perspective, is not the right diet for people with cancer. It's actually quite inflammatory. They refeed people with fruit juices, which fructose, if you think of cancer as a metabolic condition, is a no-no. So that, from a cancer perspective, using fermentation is definitely not good. And then they also are refeeding with beans that are high in lectins, that are inflammatory, not good for people with cancer, and also starches and like rice. And basically those, rice, your body doesn't know the difference between rice and ice cream. It basically is going to go straight into glucose. So that's the first thing from a metabolic perspective. The refeeding was not good. But then also when you think about the microbiome, and microbiome is really important when you're healing cancer, by refeeding with those foods, you're then basically giving the bad bacteria exactly what they want to repopulate. So you undo some of the benefits with the microbiome. So when I started seeing this, I realized, oh, wow, I can't have my clients fasting with these other centers or professionals who are fasting and then refeeding with a plant-based diet. So now I'm fasting my own clients and doing it actually in a group fashion where people fast remotely. So they fast from their own home and we monitor their vitals every day. So they take their vitals at home and then they get labs once a week. And basically, the supervision is to make sure that they're doing well and they're tolerating the fast well, and then ending it if we need to, depending on how their body does, or, switching. Sometimes people need to switch to a broth fast. So what's been incredible is that doing this with people who want to heal cancer naturally in a group setting has been even more powerful than when I was just doing it one-on-one. Because with the one-on-one, people are definitely getting the physical detox. They were getting some of the emotional stuff come up. They obviously were getting the autophagy, where the cancer starts to prioritize using the, cancer as its fuel, and also resetting the microbiome. But the emotional aspect and the mental aspect, and then also this spiritual aspect of accessing higher levels of consciousness, has really expanded in my group setting. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. Number one, I think that it's really beautiful to be doing something like a water fast with other people who also believe that healing cancer naturally is possible. Because many of my clients feel really alone, like that their doctors don't understand them. Their doctors, ridicule them for not wanting to do conventional therapies. And they're looking for other people, they're looking for community. So there's a sense of community with our people. And it's so beautiful because they're all at different phases of fasting. I start new people every Monday. And so we have people at all different phases, like someone may be on day 1 and someone else is finishing day 30 and just starting to refeed, or, a week into refeeding after 30 days of fasting. And seeing other people who've done this and then refeeding and feeling so good, and the wins, it's like, it gives such a beautiful sense of camaraderie and also excitement for what's possible. And then they support each other so beautifully, because one day one person may be experiencing something and then the next day someone else is going to experience it. And they, number one, if they've heard it already, they're like, oh, I know what that is because I saw so-and-so had that yesterday. Or sometimes they'll coach each other, on the calls. They'll say, oh yeah, I had that too last week. And then, it subsided within a couple of days. And it's just this sense of being with other people who are in it with you has been really beautiful. And then the other piece that I should have recognized, but I didn't recognize before I started doing this as a group, is that my mentor, so I recently did an episode, it was a bonus episode where Tom Cowan, who's also one of my mentors, Dr. Tom Cowan, interviewed me for his podcast. And on that podcast, I ended up talking about my main mentor, who's really my partner in my practice, Don Javier. And Don Javier is a very powerful healer. And, he is the true apprentice from the books, the Carlos Castaneda books with Don Juan. Don Juan was a very powerful shaman and sorcerer. Carlos Castaneda, who's an anthropologist from Stanford, wrote books about Don Juan. And Carlos had claimed that, that he was the apprentice. But the truth is that Carlos purchased those books from Don Javier, who at the time was young, in his teens, he sold those stories to Carlos, and then Carlos published them as if he was the apprentice, but he's not. And Don Javier is now, a 70-year-old man, and he is my mentor and really my partner in my practice. He is the one who brought water fasting onto the radar for me because it's an ancient way of healing. And what's beautiful is that Don Javier holds a very high frequency. So he is impeccable, meaning that he, does exactly what he says. He doesn't get into judgment. He doesn't get into fear. He doesn't get into expectations. He is, I don't even know how to describe him other than just pure love, like pure love. And he lives that, and he always says to us, show love in the way that you live, but he is a perfect example of that. And because of his impeccability and the power that he holds a very high frequency. And he holds the frequency for my healing group. And so they are exposed to that frequency. Coming into contact with his frequency is actually what opened my gifts. And I explained that on the episode with Tom Cowan, if you're interested in hearing that. But that's actually when I started opening to higher levels of consciousness, is when I came into his frequency. And so he holds the frequency for my fasting group, but then also he works on my fasters through the elements. And so, they have this direct energetic connection with him as part of the process. And so I think of these fasts as it's really like a vision quest. In some of the Native American traditions, they talk about going out into the wilderness without, and fasting to seek answers, right? And this is Jesus going into the desert and Buddha going under the tree. This is for wisdom. And the fasting is really like a vision quest for my people who are doing it with me. And they are able to, experience this beautiful cleaning out, but then also being exposed to very high frequencies as they're cleaning out is what partly allows them to access higher levels of consciousness. And so for me, I'm planning to do my own water fast. I would love to do 30 days, but I'm not sure I can get away from the practice to do it, because now I've got people fasting all the time. And I know that that's a real need that people need. But, I'm going to do at least 14 days myself at the end of this summer. And just as like a reset, just for my health. Like, I don't have cancer, but this is such a beautiful thing to do. And actually, if someone doesn't have active cancer, fasting is such a beautiful thing to do for your body. And also for people who have finished, like, say you did chemotherapy or you did other treatments or you've had surgery and the cancer is removed. Fasting is a beautiful way to detoxify yourself, get out all of that chemotherapy and get yourself kind of reset so that you have a better chance of the cancer not coming back. So that's what I wanted to share today. I may go into, on a future episode, the details of what that looks like. I do have a free webinar that I gave that we'll link to, that talks about the logistics and who can fast and what are the contraindications, what are the things that you'd have to think about if you're going to do this. So we'll link that in the show notes. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I look forward to seeing you next time. All right, take care. Bye. Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. And remember, just like me, you were born to heal.